High quality friendships and relationships are the key to a good life. And to have and keep good friendships and relationships, you have to be good at conversation. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 7 fundamentals of good conversation from Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay's book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Lambert from How Communication Works. This is a channel where I teach you about communication skills so you can improve your relationships, succeed at work, and be more confident. So Boghossian and Lindsay have written this book about how to have very difficult conversations. And before they dive into how to have really difficult conversations, they say there are 7 fundamentals that we have to master that apply to all conversations. These are the 7 principles. 1, identifying your goals. 2, forming partnerships with your counterpart in a conversation. 3, developing rapport. 4, learning to listen, really to listen empathically to the other person. 5, what they call shooting your own messenger, which I'll describe in a minute. 6, keeping in mind the other person's intentions and remembering that they probably have good intentions, except in a few particular cases. And 7, knowing when to walk away or end the particular conversation. So principle number 1, know what your goals are. Why are you having this conversation? What are your goals? What's the purpose for this talk? There could be many different reasons to have a conversation with a friend or a stranger or a coworker or your intimate partner or your children, whatever. So one purpose might be just to express yourself. Another might be to reach mutual understanding or to learn from one another, to find the truth together. Or you might want to intervene in someone's life or persuade them to change the way they think or the way they behave. You might want to impress the other person or someone else who's watching you. Or maybe you're just yielding to the pressure to be in the conversation and your only goal is to yield to this coercion and not be punished for not talking. But the main idea is that communication is strategic. What that means is we use communication to achieve our goals, and you can't be strategic unless you first know your goals. So the first of these fundamental principles is know your goal in the conversation. The second fundamental principle is partnership. Be partners in conversation, not adversaries. So kindness, compassion, dignity, and respect. These are the keys to success in friendships and all relationships, whether they be with coworkers or family members or friends. View yourself as a partner in a collaboration. Focus on cooperation, listening, learning from the other person. The key is to shift the goal from winning in some conversation or exerting your power or whatever it is to understanding. And so much of succeeding in conversation has to do with this particular orientation or stance of partnership, cooperation, and collaboration. Abandon the goals of argument, ridicule, debate, etc. Now, it can be tempting to argue. It can be tempting to engage in ridicule and debate. I'm guilty of this myself, but those conversations almost never go well if we want to actually succeed in conversation. And remember, the premise of all this is to form relationships, develop friendships, develop intimate relationships. And if we want to argue, ridicule, and debate, we're not going to succeed in those larger goals. Engaging in partnership, cooperation, and collaboration does not mean agreeing with everything that someone else says. What we're going for is understanding what other people say, understanding their point of view, how they see the world, how they think, how they arrived at their conclusions. It's not accepting their conclusions. Now, ultimately, we might accept some of their conclusions, but that's not what we mean by partnership, cooperation, and collaboration. We'd like to know what people believe and why they believe it. And we can do that without accepting what they believe as our own truth. So in the end, this stance, this orientation is about civility, charity, and mutual understanding. That's Boghossian and Lindsay's phrase, and I think it's really nice. Civility, charity, and mutual understanding. It's not always easy to be this generous in a conversation, especially if you're communicating across some political or moral divide. And ultimately, this begins with you. You can't count on the other person to be cooperative or to start this or to be the one who's civil and generous and so on. It has to start with you. So here are some tips that Boghossian and Lindsay give. The first, you have to want to understand. You can say to them, I want to understand. I hope we can figure this out together. Next, you have to give them the opportunity to opt out or to decline or not to answer or to end the talk, especially if you're talking about difficult things like across political or moral divides about a contentious issue. You have to give them the opportunity to opt out. Third, you have to ask yourself how someone could believe what they believe. You have to ask yourself that sincerely. You have to assume they have good intentions. We'll get to this later, but ask yourself, how could they believe what they believe? Don't just assume they're foolish or ignorant or misinformed. Ask yourself how someone just like you could come to believe what they believe. Fundamental principle number 3, develop rapport. So rapport is just another word for a feeling of friendliness, comfort, and trust between the two people in the conversation. And we want to do this at the beginning of the conversation. This can be helped by asking sincere questions, not tactical questions or gotcha questions aimed to embarrass or catch the other person in a contradiction, but sincere questions. In the beginning, when you're establishing rapport, non-controversial topics like the movies, television, popular culture, music, mutual friends, these are good topics. Asking people about their kids or their house or their parents, all of these things are sort of safe topics to develop rapport and kindness, trust in the beginning of the conversation. And it's important to do this at the beginning before you engage in any other difficult conversations about divisive issues. So developing rapport, that's principle number 3. As you develop rapport, it's critical to remember that developing the friendship and relationship and maintaining it is more important than winning some points in an argument. So here are some tips that Boghossian and Lindsay give. First, build rapport immediately. Do it at the beginning. Ask them, how are you? What's your name? How'd you find out about this place? Say more about that. How'd you get interested in that? What are you passionate about? Etc. Find common ground. Almost all of us want what's good. We want what's good for ourselves, for our family, for our community. So try to find some common ground that you can both agree on. Don't engage in what they call parallel talk. That means when they say something about themselves, don't take that same topic and tell a story about yourself. Don't make it about yourself. Allow them to talk about themselves without you having to one-up them or even just tell the same story about yourself. Invest in the relationship independent of your views about whatever this controversial issue is. Remember, the relationship is more important than winning points. Engage in a difficult conversation only if you have time and be ready to change the subject. Don't be the one who's too stubborn to change a controversial conversation. And avoid call-outs. One characteristic of modern culture is so-called call-out culture. Calling people out means they've made a moral transgression and we're going to call them out for it and shame them and embarrass them and tell them how they have to behave. Instead, try to make sense of what people are saying. Unless it's extremely rude or abusive, you don't need to call people out. Calling people out rarely ends up building a relationship and making it better. Instead, it makes people feel ashamed and embarrassed or angry and resentful. So I know that it can be a popular thing and you think you're taking the moral high ground when you call people out, but unless they're being overtly rude or abusive, don't do it. If they are being overtly rude or abusive, then set some boundaries or leave or end the conversation. Be courteous, say please, say thank you. All these things will help you establish rapport. Fundamental principle number 4, listen. People often ask me what's the most important skill in communication, and I always say listening. It's too tempting to think that communication is all about talking. How do we talk well? How do we articulate ourselves clearly or impressively or something like that? But listening is far more important than talking. People love a good listener. Let the other person go first. Let them talk first. Look at them. Turn towards them. Nod. Don't finish people's sentences. If people stumble or stop, don't try to fill in what they're going to say. Just wait. In general, talk less. Listen more. Pause. Let there be silences. If there are distractions, note them and minimize them and say, oh, wait, I'm sorry, that noise is distracting me, or I have a call, or I have a text, and then minimize those distractions. If there's a misunderstanding, stop to clarify and make it your responsibility. Don't say, you're not making any sense. That's not very clear. Say, oh, no, I didn't understand that. Could you explain it some more? Could you tell me some more about that? But make the misunderstanding your responsibility, not theirs. Listen for, acknowledge, and repeat specific feeling words. So this is a key to empathic listening in general. When people describe a feeling, it's very useful to acknowledge and repeat those specific feeling words so they know that you're listening. This is a way of signaling that you're paying attention to what they're saying, and especially what they're saying about their feelings. If you lose your focus because you've gotten distracted, make eye contact and ask them to repeat what they just said. It happens to the best of us. We get distracted either by our own thoughts or by something else. And it's polite to reestablish eye contact and ask them to repeat what they said. You can apologize too. Manage interruptions in a generous way. If they interrupt you, don't resume by starting off with exactly the same words you were saying when they interrupted you. That makes it seem like you weren't even listening to them. You were just waiting for your turn to talk. Interruptions happen. They're not always evil or intentional. Just stop, let them talk, listen, and then resume your point, or even forget about your point and go on and follow up on what they said rather than on what you wanted to say. Part of what makes us good listeners is not just waiting to respond with our own opinion, but taking what they say and building on it, asking more about it. Remember, from the very beginning, our desire is to understand people better, understand what makes them tick. Do not pull out your phone during a conversation. Even if it's a contentious conversation and you disagree about a fact, just don't do it. You might feel like you could win a point by pulling out your phone and quoting a statistic that backs up your point, but it does not build the relationship. It doesn't make people feel listened to or heard. It does not build rapport. It doesn't achieve your larger goals in the conversation. It's okay to say, I hear you, to acknowledge that you're listening. Fundamental principle number 5, shoot the messenger. There's this classic saying that says, don't shoot the messenger. That means when somebody gives us bad news, don't be angry at the person just because they delivered the bad news. But what Boghossian and Lindsay are saying here is that don't lecture people. When they say you're delivering a message, they mean you're lecturing people. Nobody likes to be lectured to, especially across political or moral divides. So they're saying don't lecture to people. Don't talk at people. There's a difference between a conversation and a lecture. I'm a college professor, so I'm guilty of, talking at people sometimes, of getting in explanation mode or lecture mode, but nobody likes to be lectured. That's not what a conversation is. When I'm being paid to lecture as a college professor, I lecture. But when I'm in a conversation with a friend or a stranger who I'm trying to understand, or a coworker or someone like that, we want to have a conversation, and a conversation is reciprocal. We want to converse with people, not talk at people. Whenever we're delivering a message, it's a one-way thing, and conversations are two-way. So don't deliver uninvited messages. This is really hard, especially across political and moral divides where we have strong commitments to our beliefs. So here are some suggestions that Boghossian and Lindsay make about how to shift from this lecturing, talking at people, to this mutual conversational style. Ask yourself, was I invited to share this particular opinion, or am I lecturing at them and talking at them? If you were really invited to share a particular opinion in the flow of the conversation, feel free to do so. Otherwise, you might want to keep it to yourself and don't talk at them. Assume your counterpart, the other person in the conversation, understands things differently and knows things that you don't know. If we make this assumption, we don't assume that we're smarter than the other person or that they have their opinions because they're ignorant. We make a generous assumption about them. We assume that they know things we don't know and they understand things for reasons that we don't know. If they start to lecture you, that doesn't give you permission to lecture them back. So two wrongs don't make a right. If they start to lecture you, ask questions instead. Follow up. Try to understand their reasoning. Following up their lecturing with sincere questions, we can nudge the conversation back into this collaborative partnership mode. If a person really does ask you a specific bit of information, you can deliver that message only after they ask, and be brief, and then return to the partnership mode of conversation. Fundamental principle number 6. Keep in mind other people's intentions and assume that your conversational partner has good intentions. The exceptions that Boghossian and Lindsay give are internet trolls and psychopaths. And I'm not sure how you know exactly when you're dealing with a psychopath, but it's pretty easy to know when you're an internet troll. Believe me, here on YouTube, I know in my comments when I'm dealing with an internet troll. So you don't have to assume trolls and psychopaths have good intentions. But in ordinary life, when we're just talking to ordinary people, friends, neighbors, strangers at the store or a restaurant or a bar, coworkers, assume that they have good intentions. And this requires a generosity of spirit on your part. I'm not saying it's always easy. I'm saying this is how you should behave if you want your conversations to go well and you want to develop friendships and relationships. So assume they have good intentions. How do we do this, especially if we can tell that they don't assume that we have good intentions? If you start to detect that your conversational partner thinks you have bad intentions, start to talk about your reasoning. Say you don't want to be wrong, but this is how you arrived at your conclusions. And this is an important issue that you'd like to be right about. This is how you thought about it. This is the evidence you considered, and this is how you arrived at your point of view. If you think your partner has bad intentions, switch to a frame of curiosity. Ask for more information about their reasoning. You can say things like, you must know more about this than I do, or you must know things about this that I don't know. Can you tell me more about how you arrived at your conclusion? Can you tell me more about what you know and how you think about this? So you substitute curiosity for contempt, which is often how we feel when we talk to people across a moral or political divide. It's like the other person has really bad intentions and you've tried these other techniques. You could admit frustration and ask about their intentions. You could say that this doesn't seem to be going very well. I'm not sure what you're hoping to get out of this conversation. What are your hopes for this conversation? What do you hope to get out of it? And then you can sort of identify whether they have good intentions. And if they don't, you can end the conversation. When you do encounter people with genuinely bad intentions, don't feed the trolls, as they say. Block them, mute them if you're online, exit from the conversation. You're not obliged to have a conversation with someone who doesn't have good intentions, who's mean-spirited or evil, who just wants to hurt you or score points against you. You don't have to be coerced into having a conversation with anyone. They don't have a right to have a conversation with you. Fundamental principle of conversation number 7, know when to walk away. Know when to end a conversation. Especially know when to stop a conversation, especially a difficult and contentious conversation, before or just when people start to get uncomfortable. Don't be that person who pushes a conversation into the deeply awkward, uncomfortable, resentful stage. If we're trying to change people's minds or trying to talk to people across a big moral or political divide, we have to remember that change happens slowly. Try to end a conversation on a positive note, and always keep in mind, we're trying to develop a relationship, maintain a friendship, understand the way other people are. That was the fundamental premise of this approach to conversations. We're not just trying to humiliate people, score points, prove that we're right, and so on. Here are some tips Boghossian and Lindsay give for how to end a conversation. When frustration becomes the primary emotion, either your primary emotion or your counterpart's primary emotion, this is a good time to end the conversation. Don't forget to breathe and to pause. It can be hard to talk about a controversial issue where you disagree with the person you're talking to about something that's very important to you and very important to them. So remember to breathe, to pause. It will calm you down. Don't engage someone past their comfort threshold. If you can tell they're uncomfortable, frustrated, nervous, anxious, whatever, just stop. We don't have to push people that hard. We want to be more polite than that. If you think you've succeeded in raising doubts in your conversational partner's mind, that is, they now doubt some of the beliefs they had before they started the conversation, then you've achieved a lot. Stop while you're ahead. Thank your partner for the time they took to talk with you and part on a friendly note. So there you have it, 7 fundamental principles for having difficult conversations. I found these to be really useful. I was doing some of them already, but some of them I could do a lot better in the future, and I'm going to try to. If you like videos like this, please like and subscribe, and even more importantly, watch some other videos on the channel. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.